All right, everyone, we'll get started. Good morning, and thank you for coming to this follow-up presentation. My name's Sarah Sweat. I work for Oregon Sea Grant. I'm co-hosting this meeting with Tanner Etherton, who is with California Sea Grant. And we just have a couple quick introduction slides to kind of set the context of what we're talking about today and a little bit about our roles at Sea Grant. So before we get into that, just very quick meeting agenda. We're going to have a presentation today by Rob Holmlund, who's our guest of honor. And then we also have a quick update from someone at the Port of Coos Bay about some of their planned activities going forward. And then we'll have 20 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll close at 11. So we just have a little meeting contract, which helps all of our meetings and events go smoothly. Try to honor the agenda and the reason why we're all here to learn about this topic. Please be respectful of different opinions and perspectives. When we're talking about these coastal topics, we know that people have a lot of different opinions and thoughts about them, and that's okay. We just ask to, keep an open mind and listen respectfully to other people when they're speaking and asking questions. You guys are all encouraged to ask questions and participate, please. That's why we're all here. We want you guys to get engaged. And then if you like, you can introduce yourself briefly when you speak. And just so you know that this meeting is being recorded, we're going to post it on our YouTube channel when it's done. So if you'd like to keep anonymous, there are ways that you can ask anonymous questions. And just be mindful of your speaking time too when asking a question, since we only have an hour today. So some Zoom meeting tech. Closed captions are available. You guys should see a menu bar at the bottom of your meeting. There's 3 ways that you can ask a question. You can use the chat, which is preferred during the presentation if you have any clarifying questions or comments. And then if you want to speak up, you can raise your hand and say your question. Or we also have the Q&A feature enabled, which is good if you want to do an anonymous question. And then, like I said before, please try to stay muted while you're not speaking. So a little bit about our Sea Grant program, if you're not familiar. The National Sea Grant College Program was established in 1966, and our goal is to work to create and maintain healthy coastal environments and economies. So we consist of 34 university-based programs in every coastal and Great Lakes state, including Puerto Rico and Guam. And our goal is to help citizens better understand, conserve, and utilize America's coastal resources. So I introduced myself before, but just again, I'm Sarah Sweat. I work at Oregon State University with Oregon Sea Grant. I lead our Marine Renewable Energy Extension Program, which covers offshore wind and wave energy. And my goal is to work to understand different groups' needs, preferences, and concerns towards marine renewable energy, and then develop programs like this that helps respond to those interests, really to make sure that Oregonians and coastal residents are informed and equipped with the knowledge that they need to be engaged in this space. And then Tanner, who's here, and he'll introduce himself in a second. We've been collaborating, trying to find ways to strengthen our partnership between the West Coast Sea Grant programs. We came on at a similar time, and that was part of a goal of, increasing our program's capacity to work on this topic since, especially offshore wind basically started coming up in any conversation about the coast. So I will pass it over to Tanner, and he will introduce himself and then talk a little bit about our program today.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Tanner Etherton. I'm an economic analyst with the Schatz Energy Research Center at Cal Poly Humboldt and an extension specialist with California Sea Grant. My role is very similar to Sarah's. I work with tribes and communities to better understand the socioeconomic implications of offshore wind development in Northern California. And this, of course, includes the Humboldt Bay Offshore Wind Heavy Lift Marine Terminal project. And as Sarah mentioned, we partnered on a number of projects. But most recently, we've been focused on building a connection between Humboldt and Coos Bay so that these communities can share knowledge and experience as they both face potential large-scale port developments in support of emerging industries. Next slide. But these communities have more in common than just this port development. They both have robust working waterfronts, including strong fishing industries, unique and important ecosystems, and from our experience, shared values around the protection of coastal resources and natural environments, and the tribes and communities that depend on them. So to build on these connections, Sarah and I organized a community meeting last fall in Coos Bay. I invited members of my community in Humboldt to come and speak about their perspectives and lessons learned from Humboldt's ongoing experience with planning for the development of a large-scale offshore wind port facility, the Humboldt Bay Heavy Lift Marine Terminal. These speakers and partners included Rob Holmlund, who's here today, Director of Development for the Humboldt Bay Harbor District, Tribal Representative Heidi Moore-Gunup, the Blue Lake Rancheria, aquatic ecologist Sharon Kramer with H.T. Harvey and Associates, and local fisherman Ken Bates, co-founder and executive director of the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association. The conversation was very well received and helped surface both shared challenges and practical lessons, and it is what brought us here today. And with that, I will let Sarah introduce Rob.
Many of you guys attended the panel in November, which went really well. We had about 60 participants from the community come out, and we had a lot of requests to do a follow-up presentation. And Rob, during the panel, had given this presentation before. We didn't have it recorded, so we thought that we would have this virtual session so we could have a recording of his presentation as a resource and also just continue on this conversation of, drawing through lines between our communities and within our region. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rob, who's the Director of Development for the Humboldt Bay Harbor District. And I'm so thankful that you're, willing to give this presentation again. I think it's really appreciated. And I will stop sharing and let you get your slides up, and we'll get started with that.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, of course.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Super. Hi, everybody. Rob Holmlund. It's an honor to be here. Happy to help. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'm just going to dive straight into the presentation here. So as Sarah and Tanner indicated, I presented this a couple of months ago at the State of the Coast conference. Made a couple of adjustments to the presentation since then, but it's not fundamentally different. But hopefully the slides work a little bit better this time. And what you're seeing here is Humboldt Bay. You've got Woodley Island Marina on the right and the commercial waterfront of the city of Eureka on the left. And in the center is the Redwood Marine Terminal site, which is where our heavy lift marine terminal to service offshore wind is planned. It's actually just a little bit right of that tallest building there in the smokestack. And that site was formerly the largest employment center in the region for multiple consecutive generations and is now largely vacant. And so one of our objectives here is to revitalize a site that formerly was a major employment center and needs some cleanup. But it definitely has some challenges and impacts, or the potential for impacts, that we'll talk about. So, okay, so this is Coos Bay. Obviously, if I draw an outline around the main parts of the bay there, this is Humboldt Bay. And overlaying the two on top of each other, you can kind of get an impression to scale of how the two bays relate to one another in size. Here's a different perspective. So there's Humboldt Bay laid on top of Coos Bay. And then just continuing that comparison, in county population, you've got Humboldt Bay, Humboldt County really about twice the size. Median age, Humboldt's a little bit younger. Median household incomes nearly identical. Home values a little higher in Humboldt. Unemployment's the same. Primary industries, a lot of overlap there. The only thing that's really different is cannabis in Humboldt Bay. And then the GDP, so that is the total economic output of the county divided by the population of the county. So you can see Humboldt Bay is a little bit higher. So very similar communities between the two of us, a lot in common. And so my job is to oversee development-related activities in Humboldt Bay. I'm based here in Eureka, live here with my family, and work here right here on Woodley Island, right in the bay. So I'm right out my window here, looking at Humboldt Bay all day, every day. We've got Arcata, City of Arcata and Cal Poly Humboldt in the north part of the bay, College of the Redwoods down here in the south. The Wiyot Tribes Reservation is right on the south edge of the bay, and all of this is Wiyot ancestral territory. Aquaculture is really critical to Humboldt Bay. It's a really important part of our economy and heritage. That is there. Recreation is also really important in Humboldt Bay for the tribes and other. Can anybody hear me? Looks like Tanner just entered the waiting room.
Tanner, he had a tech issue, but yeah, I just had one comment that your volume was a little soft. It's
Okay.
coming through okay for me, but yeah, if you could just speak a little, maybe a little louder. And then again, everyone, if you'd like, you should be able to turn the closed captions on, which might help with that too.
I close my office door, I'll talk a lot louder. There's also a lot of natural resource areas in the bay and a lot of natural resource protection, including multiple wildlife areas. South part of the bay, again, recreation. There's no aquaculture really down there. Also a lot of natural resource protection. We have commercial waterfronts and industrial waterfronts with some, well, and then there's obviously fishing. The largest fishing fleet in the North Coast is based out of Humboldt Bay. There's a lot of aquaculture here in the mid part of the channel. And then we also have residential on the Samoa Peninsula. So there's a big mix, a lot of things going on really close to one another here. If we turn north to the right and just look at the main part of the bay here in the center, where the majority or really all of the industrial activity is, and turn a map on top of that, the teal areas are the federal navigation channels. So these are congressionally authorized channels to a certain width and depth that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers maintains on a monthly to annual basis to maintain those depths and widths. Our entrance can silt in sometimes and have emergency closures or emergency dredging. But generally, our channel is 48 feet deep at the entrance, 38 feet deep through the main channel here. This green area is our project site. All of the purple, including the green, are coastal dependent industrially zoned parcels. So according to California Coastal Commission state law, these areas in purple have to be preserved for industrial use. Zooming in, just looking at the project site here in green. This is an older version, but a good cartoon representation of what our project generally will look like. I'll get into more detail about this. The stippled pattern is effectively compacted gravel. It's just outdoor storage. So the vast majority of the site will largely just look like equipment storage. And then these wharves will have cranes that assemble wind turbines and ultimately could do other things as a heavy lift marine terminal. But backing up a little bit, looking at historic port activity in Humboldt Bay, there's a long legacy of a lot of different kinds of activity coming in and out of Humboldt Bay. All the way through the 1990s, the majority of activity was related to logging and wood product manufacturing. And then in the 90s, that really started diminishing pretty rapidly to the point where now we have somewhere between 300 and 600 acres of vacant industrial land on the bay. Coincidentally, the state of California, a couple of years ago, came up with a plan to achieve 100% renewable energy in the state of California by the year 2045. And the plan identifies a portfolio of different kinds of energy production to get to that goal. Down here at the bottom, you can see by 2045, none of these really account to much. And so I'm just going to cut those off of the chart. So the state's goal really relies on solar, storage, and wind. And here's offshore wind. But why wind energy at all? Why not just rely on solar? Well, you can see that solar constitutes the majority of the state's plan. And in fact, battery storage is significantly larger than offshore wind, even though offshore wind goals have been increased since this plan was released. You can still see that solar constitutes 97 gigawatts, wind onshore and offshore combined 38 gigawatts, and then battery storage at 53 gigawatts. And so the state has done a lot of number crunching, a lot of planning, and come to the determination that if we're going to have 100% renewable energy by the year 2045, wind has to be a part of the picture. There's a lot of complex reasons for that. But more or less, what the state wants to do is eliminate coal-fired power plants, natural gas power plants, any fossil fuel burning power plants, and replace them with solar, battery, and wind. Wind comes in two flavors, onshore and offshore, and Europe has been doing offshore wind since the year 1990. The US is relatively new to this. So how does this work, and why is this relevant to Humboldt Bay? Well, as you'll see in a moment, the state contacted the Harbor District, Humboldt Bay Harbor District, and said, we've got this plan to go to renewable energy. Offshore wind has to be part of the picture. We have looked at all of the ports on the West Coast, and Humboldt Bay has some really unique assets that make it critical to the ultimate success of offshore wind. And the Harbor District owns a pretty big vacant industrial site. And so ultimately, we ended up with several state grants proceeding towards developing the site that I'll talk about in a moment. But for context, so you understand how offshore wind works, first, somebody's got to manufacture all of the parts, right? And there are a lot of different components that go into an offshore wind turbine. Because they are so large, as I'll show you in a moment, offshore wind turbines can be twice as large as onshore wind turbines, and that's because they're difficult to transport across land, but a lot easier to transport across water. All of these different parts are going to be made in different ports right next to the water, so they can be lifted onto a ship, and then all of those ships have to find themselves in one location where all of those parts are put together. And that is the role that Humboldt Bay is going to play. It's called a staging and integration site. You stage all of the parts, and then you integrate them together. And so what you're seeing here is one of the floating foundations that the wind turbine goes on top of, being transported across the wharf onto a semi-submersible barge. They'll then lower that into the water, and then a crane will build the turbine on top of this floating platform as it's floating. So you can see this circle here. That is where the steel tower will go, and ultimately the whole thing will be put together. So once that floating foundation is floating in the water, then the crane puts on steel tower sections, and then on top of that, put the nacelle, which is where the blades connect and generates the power, and then the blades are connected to that. That takes about a week to go from all the parts laying on the ground to all of the part being assembled and ready to operate in the ocean. At that point, they then connect the turbine, floating as it is, to an array of tugboats and tow it into the ocean and tow it to its ultimate destination. This can be hundreds of miles, this tow. So for instance, Scotland right now has some of the largest turbines and largest farms, and most of those are assembled, manufactured, towed from Norway across the North Sea. So very, very difficult waters across the North Sea, and so this has been done quite a lot in Europe. Ultimately, those turbines find themselves at the right spot in the ocean. They are connected through cables, electrical cables to one another. They are moored to the ocean floor. And then you've got effectively a power plant in the ocean, each one of them generating, megawatts of energy. So as I said before, the state analyzed all of the ports in California and on the West Coast. BOEM analyzed in Oregon and Washington, looking at the capabilities of different ports to service offshore wind. And staging and integration is the most difficult port type. And you can see here that the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, and Humboldt are the only ones that are good candidates for this in California. So that's the green hexagons there. And so you can see the Port of Humboldt Bay. We also happen to have, coincidentally, an offshore wind farm that has been leased, two of them side by side, to private energy companies who plan on putting wind turbines in this area here just off of the coast. And there is another offshore wind area south of us, south of the San Francisco Bay, and it is very likely that we will manufacture turbines that will also be towed there. Port of Long Beach is doing a project nearly identical to ours, just about double the size, but effectively same in every other way. They will also be manufacturing or staging and integration turbines and shipping. All right, so that tow component is a challenging part of offshore wind. So there, that blue circle or blue star, you can see Humboldt Bay, and down here you've got the Port of Long Beach. If you look at an equidistant tow radius, you can see that Morro Bay is a bit closer to Long Beach than Humboldt. But if you look to the future, there's also equidistant tow radius is a little bit bigger, so you can see the distance from Humboldt to Morro Bay, 400-mile radius from each port. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. The brightest red areas are the best locations to put wind farms. Most consistent speed, highest wind speed. It's just inherently the best place to produce wind energy off the coast. That also happens to be the best place in the nation. If you compare even on land, these are the best places to put wind turbines. Whereas in the southern part of the state, there's a lot less wind potential. And so looking to the future, assuming that offshore winds will ultimately pick up and match the pace of Europe and China, Humboldt Bay is really ideally located to be a staging and integration port. So to summarize this, the state's got a goal to have 25 gigawatts of offshore wind by the year 2045. Assuming each turbine's about 15 megawatts, then we're going to have about 1,600 turbines manufactured, all the parts staged, integrated, towed to other places in the ocean. That gives us 19 years from today to help the state reach its goal. If we started in the year 2030 of manufacturing, then we've got 15 years. So that's a lot of equipment to manufacture, a lot of jobs. So how are these turbines made? Just looking at the history, 1990, Denmark put the first floating offshore wind turbine in the ocean. It was relatively small, smaller than the Statue of Liberty. You can see the Golden Gate Bridge in the background there for context, for scale. Then Sweden, the United Kingdom, a bunch of other countries started doing this year after year. And each subsequent country, each subsequent year, the turbines got larger and larger. There's a lot of reasons for that, but generally the simplest way to explain it is you get a lot more energy, 4 to 10 times more energy by doubling the size of a turbine because the swept area of the blades is bigger than looking at the trigonometry and just the math of it all, and use significantly less resources. So a larger turbine can produce far more energy than a small turbine, but use less energy or less materials than the equivalent multiple smaller turbines. So anyway, this is a 13 megawatt turbine that we're looking towards China I believe actually this is an article about how they just broke the record with a 16 megawatt turbine I just saw the other day. Now they have deployed a 20 megawatt turbine. So obviously the future, they're going to get larger. And so our project is actually planning for 15 to 25 megawatt turbines. I've already kind of walked you through this, but I indicated that the offshore turbines are twice the size of onshore turbines. And that is because of transportation. So on land, up to a certain size, you can move blades by train, but if they get too long, you can't go around corners. So then you have to move each blade individually on truck, and that has its upper limits. You can only go so big. But in the sea, you can make much larger equipment. And so ocean-based offshore wind turbines are significantly larger than land-based. The consequence is that you have to manufacture everything in a port. Couldn't do this in, say, Ashland and then ship it to the coast. You'd never be able to get it to the coast. And so all of the equipment has to be manufactured in a port. So multiple ports around Europe that have been doing this for a long time, and now ports being planned in New York, Massachusetts, Virginia, all throughout New England, some of them built and operational already. So looking at California, all of the ports of California are going to play a role in this, and potentially Oregon ports as well. Some ports are going to be manufacturing components. There's a lot of different kinds of components. Some of them are steel, some fiberglass. There's a lot of different manufacturing opportunities there. You've got staging integration, obviously. But then there's also operations and maintenance. You can't imagine a coal-fired power plant or a nuclear-fired power plant that doesn't have staff there 24/7. The same is effectively true of an offshore wind power plant. So there will be crew transfer vessels that come into a port, preferably one as close as possible to the offshore wind farm, pick up a whole suite of specialists, 20 to 30 people on a ship, and that ship will go out and go from turbine to turbine for weeks at a time. Ship can have, probably will have nurse and a doctor, biologist, a wildlife specialist, and obviously a whole array of mechanics, drone pilots, different kinds of maintenance specialists. That ship will come back in, an identical crew will get on the ship, and they'll go back out and just have rotating shifts. And so some of those I think are the most exciting kind of jobs. So the 13 and 15-year-old son, those are the kinds of jobs that I'm personally really excited for them to explore. So a lot of opportunities for ports throughout California and Oregon as well. Humboldt doing staging integration, so that's all I'm going to focus on from this point forward. And these are the ports capable of doing that in California. So you can see that we play a really important role here. That's because we have the right channel width, channel depth. We don't have any vertical draft restrictions like airports or bridges. And we have large development areas ready to go. If you want to know more about that, I encourage you to look at this study. There's a couple of others that are worth looking at. So looking at Humboldt Bay and our project specifically, if we zoom in here, you can see the offshore wind lease area just off of our coast in Humboldt Bay there. Just for context, I've already kind of showed you this, but if you're not familiar, I've already looked at this here. So zooming in and just looking at our project, this is more or less how it works. So you've got large storage areas, ships show up with blades manufactured elsewhere, crane picks them up, equipment moves them around, stores them on the site. You've got steel tower sections. The project will more or less look like this. And then on the north end, it's actually, we've shifted this now to the center, but you've got floating foundation assembly. So all of the parts of the floating foundation arrive on a ship, and then we put them together on site. And then ultimately, as I showed before, launch those into the water. And then those floating foundations can either be stored in the bay while they're waiting for their turn at the crane, or if the crane's ready, go straight to the crane. Crane puts all the parts together, and then the fully integrated turbine can be towed out to sea, or if the weather conditions are not right or the tidal conditions, then a fully integrated turbine can also be stored in the bay. And so these yellow stippled patterns that you'll see are crosshatch patterns. Those are wet storage areas and a really big important part of the project. Then our site has a whole another crane, so you can do the exact same thing on this side. So we can do 2 of these per week across the lifetime of the project. Once it's ready to be towed, then this is the route to get out of the bay through the shipping channel. And then from there, once it leaves, it could go to Morro Bay, future Oregon lease area, or the Humboldt lease area just off of our coast. And I think I already showed that. So in conclusion here, this is a coal-fired power plant, burning coal 24/7, 365 to generate electricity. With the rise of AI, increasing populations, more cell phones, electric cars, the demand for electricity per capita in the US is steadily growing. The power plants we have are not sufficient to meet our demand for power. We're going to have to build more sources of power. Could be more coal-fired power plants, natural gas, nuclear, solar, wind, whatever it is, we have to build more energy. Right now, all the power that's powering my computer and the lights in this room and everything I can see comes from a natural gas power plant. The state's goal is to shift that towards renewable energy. Looking at our project site, it closed in the 2008 to 2013 era, hundreds of layoffs. This is what it looked like in 1959. So it was jam-packed with activity. There's a lot going on here. If you look at that big dock on the left side, this is what it looks like today. So that's the same dock. This is the project area. We clearly have a lot of cleanup to do at the site, potential for contamination. So we're deep into that process. And a status update of the project. So we have signed a project labor agreement guaranteeing union labor construction. There are tribal hiring preferences in that, as well as local hiring preferences. It's a whole suite of 7 different requirements for that. We have a green terminal resolution where we're planning for the project to be 0 emissions as soon as is technically feasible. We're doing cold ironing at the site, all the electric forklifts and on-site equipment, stuff like that. We have a lot of solar built into the project itself. Missing murdered Indigenous people prevention resolution was requested of us by several tribes. We worked closely with several tribes on guidance on how to write and pass that resolution. CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, equivalent to NEPA. And then a whole lot of permits are deep underway, including a lot of technical studies. We are really very close to finishing our 30% engineering design for the site. And we have significant community and tribal participation. So there's the project site. There is fishing out in the ocean. There's also fishing in the bay. So that is a stakeholder that's really important to us that we're working with regularly to, their biggest concern, honestly, is the shipping, the towing in and out, and the conflict with them coming and going of the bay. There's aquaculture right here up against the project site, and aquaculture elsewhere in the bay that is concerned about the project. We have residences that aren't too far away, and we also have residences that are right next door. There are a lot of tribes involved, 7 different tribes that we've been meeting with, a lot of different recreational groups. There's cultural and natural resource protections to consider. So I kind of just summarized this. Various groups of people that we're working with. We have established a number of committees to help us look at the possible impacts of the project and ways to modify those. So these are all committees that we meet with, sometimes monthly. That one was funded by a federal grant that we no longer have funding for, so we're looking for ways to replace that. And we're also exploring how this project can benefit the community. So we're classifying this into a number of different ways. One is natural benefits. Those are just inevitable and inherent outcomes. They happen whether we want them to or not. There's going to be new jobs created. Then there are built-in benefits. These are things that aren't really needed for the project, but we strategically added them for the benefit of third parties. So there's neighborhood trail, off-site, we are upgrading a fishing dock for the fishing community, things like that. Then we are working on a benefit program. This is an ongoing systematic supplemental grant program where we will issue grants to categories of interested parties and affected parties. And then we're exploring community benefit agreements as well. The way we've been looking at this lately is there are nested levels of benefits, so that those natural benefits, the things that just naturally occur, we want to enhance those to the greatest degree possible. Where we can't make it just a natural outcome of the project, we can build in benefits. And only after we've done the best job we can with those do we really want to explore community benefit agreements. And that's because the closer benefit is to the core of the project, we believe that that's the best outcome for everyone. So for instance, revenue to the Harbor District will be a natural outcome of the project, and the Harbor District exists exclusively to benefit Humboldt Bay, recreation, conservation, development, port-related activities. So that's an example of a natural benefit. Another one is jobs, site cleanup. Things we can add are those fishing dock upgrades. We're adding a neighborhood trail. It's just part of the permitting, part of the construction cost. The core benefits here are just intrinsic. Community benefit agreements are legal transactional documents. And so we're working as hard as we can to make benefits as close to the core of the project as we can. I could talk for quite a while about funding. We had quite a bit of federal funding that was recently rescinded, but we're still working with a good amount of state funding. The next couple of years, we'll continue with engagements, finish the permits. We're seeking a proposition climate change bond funding that was passed by the state. Begin construction of the mitigation sub-projects as soon as we can so that we pre-mitigate for any impacts, looking at our community benefit program and some other benefit sub-projects, and then getting ready for construction, which just for phase one of the project will take 3 years to construct. It's a whole lot of things that we're consistently working with stakeholders to evaluate and consider, and this is definitely not an exhaustive list. Individualized tribal participation has been really important, working with 7 different tribes. Every one of them has been very clear that they do not want to be lumped together. They want to evaluate the project on their own and have an individual relationship with the project in the Harbor District. We're following that model with stakeholder participation as well. Aquaculture businesses have the potential to be impacted by the project, as do neighbors that live right next door. They could get together every month and be in the same committee, but we came to the conclusion that it's really best for them to meet individually because they don't have a lot in common. And so the people that live next door want to talk about sound walls or not having a sound wall, or what the fence looks like, or what the building architecture is. Whereas aquaculture is much more interested in dredging and potential for water-based contamination. So that individualized stakeholder participation is really core to our strategy. Because we've been able to focus so much on individual stakeholders, we've been readjusting our studies by request. So the Aquaculture Committee, for instance, has been asking us to do a number of new studies that we weren't formally doing. We're putting a lot of constant effort into identifying opportunities for impact minimization and trying to build in community benefits. We try to collaborate as much as possible with other ports, looking at that benefit program. And we meet with anybody that wants to talk about the project and try to understand the community's perspective. And we're open to adjustments as we go. We have a lot of opportunities for public engagement coming up soon. And anybody that wants to know about this project is encouraged to reach out to us directly. I'm happy to talk to anybody. And I've got a lot more slides. If any questions come up, I can have some visuals. But that is what I've got for you today.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. And now if Linnell is here for an update from the Port of Coos Bay, we'll let her get set up. Yeah, I see. Hi, Linnell. I just wanted to add some quick context for the Oregonians here that Oregon currently does not have any offshore wind areas. They were not leased, and when the new administration came in last year, they withdrew all of the unleased wind energy areas. But of course, we have tribes, fishing communities, other parties who still will be interested and affected by the offshore wind development in California. So I think learning about what's happening there, and especially learning about what these onshore effects of offshore wind development look like, are really important to, continuing the conversation. If there's anything we've learned from our East Coast Sea Grant partners, it's that this time of kind of a slowdown, a pause, can actually be very beneficial to, continuing getting these resources, these studies, and learning about what a future offshore wind industry on the West Coast would look like. Yeah, so Linnell, I would love to have you introduce yourself and give a quick update, and then we'll do some questions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I am Linnell Comstock. I am the Chief Executive Officer for the Oregon International Port of Coos Bay. I have to admit, this is the second time I've seen Rob present on this subject, and I'm just as much impressed by his project and his community engagement process this time as I was the first time hearing his presentation. I think Rob's project really is a great example of a successful community engagement story. And I know it wasn't an easy feat, so well done, Rob. And so I was asked to present on the Port of Coos Bay's status on starting our own community advisory committee plans. And so I don't have an update on offshore wind. It's more focused on our community advisory update. So when I talk about the Port of Coos Bay, I'm talking about the port in general, our everyday operations at the port, not the Pacific Coast Intermodal Port Project, which has its own community engagement plan, which will ramp up as that project progresses. The Port of Coos Bay in general is developing a framework to integrate community advisory groups into different projects related to core operations at the port. We just completed our strategic business plan update, which is being taken to the Port Commission in February for adoption. And one of our management goals outlined in the plan is to develop more channels for community engagement. And so we have specific objectives of determining areas of interest to be addressed by these advisory committees, formulating processes and policies for the committees, and enlisting environmental and other subject matter experts for the committees as well. After Rob presented the first time, my staff and I met with him to discuss his community engagement process associated with his project. And Rob graciously shared his community advisory committee plans and his strategies and his guiding principles with us, which we are using as a framework for creating our own community advisory committee plans. So thank you, Rob, for sharing your resources with us. So indeed, this is a work in progress, but it is currently being created as we speak, and with the intent to start utilizing community advisory groups within the upcoming months. That's it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Linnell. It's great to have you here and to just like give that local context and update.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, good. And I will say, we have our notes from the November panel that I'm going to share in the chat with the other perspectives that we had talking about their experience with this project. And it's really great to hear this perspective from both of these ports, but just acknowledging that, these other groups that we had at this panel, there might be some different considerations and tidbits of knowledge that could be helpful. So definitely check out those notes. And yeah, we have 15 minutes for questions. I had one question come through my email that we could start with. Again, Tanner had sent a chat, but you can raise your hand if you're comfortable with speaking, use the chat, or if you'd like to do an anonymous question, the Q&A function is there. So our first question for Rob is, since your port is operating under a state mandate to be a top wind energy project location for California, do you think the port was able to adequately address questions and concerns for citizens of your district and have had for impacts and for impacts of the project to the estuary and communities. I hope that made sense.
A lot. I would start with saying that it's not a mandate. So there's nothing legal obligatory about the project that we're doing. The state didn't tell us we had to do it. They called upon us and our board evaluated and said, we would like to answer that call. So it was more recruitment from the state and encouragement and support through grants, but I wouldn't call it whatever the word was there at the beginning, a mandate.
Yeah.
The state has been phenomenal in helping us through every step. We would not definitively, absolutely would not have been able to do the community engagement we've been doing without state support. Just the grants alone really made that possible. It takes a lot of staff time. It takes a lot of consultant assistance. We have, experts in biology, ecology, community engagement. There's so much support the state has provided, and whenever we ask, for assistance, the state's been there. The State Lands Commission, the Coastal Commission, and especially the California Energy Commission. So, couldn't say enough about how critical the state has been to the success of this project to date. I think the question was also about evaluating the prospective impacts. And so that is also a huge part of what the grants are funding. A lot of analysis, we're looking at marine mammals and eelgrass, and a number of listed species, working with fishermen and aquaculture to understand those kinds of business impacts. Have I answered the question?
Yeah, I think that is a good answer. If there's any follow-up, feel free to put it in the chat. Does anyone else have a question? If not, Tanner and I can come up with some discussion questions. I know I have some. I don't see any questions, so I will say, I know a lot of people in Oregon and in Coos Bay, when thinking about port development, are really interested and concerned about, the extent of local economic development and jobs. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, the project in Humboldt and what those, local job benefits are anticipated to be.
Sure. Well, offshore wind is an industry, it's a sector. And so there are a lot of different kinds of projects. So you could be talking about the projects that are in the ocean. You could talk about the transmission projects that will be ultimately required to connect the turbines in the ocean to power demand. The one that I can speak to the most are port-related job projects. And so obviously there's going to be quite a bit of construction jobs. We have 2 phases. Each one will take 3 years to construct. That's pile driving and grading, just standard construction, buildings and electrical. There's so many different kinds of jobs there. But that also includes things like biological monitors, right? So pin and pet experts, seals and sea lions, making sure that construction doesn't impact or salmonids. So this is a whole range of jobs just associated with construction. Then you've got a 20 to 40 year lifetime of operations. And so then you have a whole lot of jobs there, engineering, and, there's obviously cranes and operators of equipment. But there are also probably jobs that people don't think about with a 180-acre impervious site. I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure there's probably going to be somebody whose job is just to plan and deal with and maintain the stormwater systems. So there's all kinds of jobs associated with operations. And then obviously there's a lot of maritime jobs. And so on the East Coast where this is happening, a lot of fishermen have been hired in the off season to help with this tow out array where they lead the tow out as an escort, sometimes looking for whales or any kind of wildlife to prevent impacts in that way. And so there's opportunities for fishermen in peak seasons. I could probably go on and on. I think Tanner could probably answer this question better than I can. He's an economist and I'm not. But the opportunity for jobs is pretty phenomenal. And then outside of our bay, the manufacturing of all of this equipment is really probably the largest opportunity.
Yeah, Ramphis.
Well, I had a question to go different direction. I don't know if there was more to the response, but I'm happy to hold for a minute.
I would say that Rob covered it well. There's more analysis that needs to be done to understand the economic benefits, to make it more realistic and accurate for the communities where these projects are happening, so that they can understand where those opportunities lie more exactly and prepare and develop a workforce that can meet that need. But that's my follow-up. So Ramphis, go ahead and let us know what you got.
Yeah, thanks. And just props to Sarah and the Oregon Sea Grant team on doing these series. I've been unable to be on many of them, so I'm glad to have joined this one. I know the focus here is on port development, but it feels like the application here around community engagement, collaboration, or partnership with communities, those lessons learned could apply to almost any kind of public development going around the state. I know a lot of folks are always feeling like projects are being done onto them, or despite, I think, the potential public benefits. But I don't know if anyone can speak to this, Rob or others, like what makes it work as there are additional resources for the poor or other local governments to really engage and improve on public engagement. Like what also makes it work from the how community shows up? Like I know there's another story on just like community participation, but like what's that glue that makes it work, beyond talking about, hey, here are stated goals, but like what what what's helpful when it comes for like community showing up, being solutions oriented? Like what are those things that really makes the glue work as community and other stakeholders interface with an agency like the port or other entities?
Wow. I find myself surprised to say this, but it's just like the first thing that came to mind is to never be satisfied with the job that you're doing when it comes to community engagement. So we have a community center here, the Wharfinger. We have filled it to maximum capacity multiple times, and it's like, oh wow, that feels really amazing. Then you count the people, and you're like, man, that is like 0.1% of the population of the city of Eureka, right? So filling a community center looks like a lot of people and it feels like a lot of people, but if you really think about it, there's so many people not present. So then diversifying our outreach is really important. Another thing that just comes to mind off the top of my head, I love the question, never really thought about this out loud, so I'm just thinking about it out loud now, is to really look at who is likely to be impacted by the project the most. So Eureka's commercial waterfront, Old Town Eureka, if you haven't had a chance to visit it, remarkable place, definitely worth going to and experiencing. Somebody told me once that they live in Fortuna, that they come to Old Town Eureka to go Christmas shopping every year. And they're not going to like seeing the turbines when they are in Old Town on the waterfront. Then there are people that I have sat with on their front porch who live right next to the project site, and you could flip a quarter over the fence onto the project site, and they have concerns. And it's probably not fair to compare people's concerns, but looking at the aquaculture community and the fishing community, the people who live right next door, and giving them an opportunity to really sit down with us, to go to their place of business, to go to the aquaculture business, to go to people's homes. That is really meaningful community engagement, because we can hold a big public meeting and people from all over the county in a 100-mile radius can come. But talking to the people that live right there, that's a different level of engagement.
And Rob, if I might add, in Humboldt, we're lucky to have a really engaged community and really engaged organizations and agencies. Having Cal Poly Humboldt, the Shot Center, having California Secret presence here, Core Hub, other NGOs, I think has been really useful in creating other trusted sources for information. So the port isn't the only one engaging. We're engaging on all fronts, and I think that that's been beneficial. And Rob, that kind of leads into another question we got in the Q&A. They thank you all for presenting this great info, and we're hoping that you can expand on how partnerships with NGOs and tribes have helped out with the port's project capacity, especially with community engagement. What have been some key best practices learned that you would suggest for other ports to start with?
Yeah. Calling on other organizations for help has also been really important and a big part of our success. So like organizations like EPIC and Humboldt Waterkeeper, these are environmental advocacy nonprofits. There's the Humboldt Area Foundation. There's so many nonprofits that we have called upon and have really come to us and volunteered to help. They have their own networks and their own email lists and their own constituents that they hear from. And so understanding who has an ear to different audiences is something else I encourage anybody doing a development project to. You can be overwhelmed with so many different groups coming at you. And so one of our solutions has been to create a community advisory committee, which has an unruly 45 members. And we meet monthly. We've taken a break since our loss of federal funding, but we're picking up again next month. Half virtual, half in person. And we actually switch from a Wednesday at 5 p.m. to a Friday at noon, where we provide food at both occasions because it doesn't work for everyone's schedule. So we just rotate that every other month. And we tried to get as diverse a group of people into that as possible. So there's a representative from law enforcement, representative from homelessness services, obviously a representative from aquaculture and the town next door and fishing. But we tried to diversify, healthcare so that we could reach people that we otherwise wouldn't have. And that has made the Community Advisory Committee really valuable because it helps us filter what otherwise might be an unmanageable amount of people to work with and try to get representatives from different sectors of our community.
There's one more question in the chat, but just wanted to say, since we're almost at time, that this presentation is recorded, and when I send out the recording, I will include a document with resources too, everything that was sent in the chat and more. So keep an eye out on that. Yeah, and then we had one more. Carla just said we can skip the question, but it was about environmental monitoring. I don't know if Rob, if you wanted to speak to that. She asked if there would be a more consolidated monitoring program proposed here than what we saw on the East Coast. And I'm wondering if that question is more, aimed for the port and the near shore, or if that is general. But if you have anything to say about that.
Okay. In the port, I can say definitely, because we have CEQA. So there are other equivalents, but the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requires environmental review of federally funded projects or federal projects in federal waters that impact federal property. NEPA came after CEQA. So the California Environmental Quality Act was established in the late 60s to evaluate the potential for environmental impacts and then figure out what to do to minimize those and disclose them to the public. It has become so much more robust since then, and it's really the most robust environmental analysis tool in the United States. And so just for that fact alone, yes, it will be at a higher level than likely what is being done on the East Coast just for that. And that includes mitigation monitoring, reporting programs as mandatory. So CEQA's got built into it those long-term monitoring requirements.
Yeah, and we also had a session on this in the fall where we heard from someone at the California Ocean Protection Council about their monitoring guidance plans too. So that's something, more general that I can include in the resources. Yeah, and we are at time, perfect timing. Unless anyone has any last minute burning questions, thoughts, I think we can wrap up and give a big thank you to Rob, and also thank you to Linnell for joining, and thank you to all of the participants and for your great questions.